There's a story back in the early part of the book of Genesis that we're all familiar with. It's the story of Lot and Abraham. We wonder sometime, I guess, why Abraham was so interested in Lot, because Lot was not a very good man. Although he's referred to as righteous Lot a little bit later in the New Testament, quite a bit later in the New Testament, nevertheless, some of the things that Lot did were really very reprehensible. As I was reading the story and thinking about this lesson and all, I thought to myself that a number of years ago, a fellow wrote a book called Looking Out for Number One. And I read that book. Someone told me that it was a very unique book. So I read the book. I'm kind of sorry that I read it, because it was a waste of time and a waste of a little bit of money. But the book was designed to say that in the business world, you've got to look out for yourself. Nobody is going to look out for you. And so if you don't look out for yourself, then things are going to go bad. He went on and talked about the fact that sometimes this requires a little bit of abuse to the other person. But that's just the way life is. That's the way the business world is. Sometimes you have to step on somebody else in order to get where you want to go. So look out for number one. That doesn't work in business, in my own personal opinion, and I've been in business. But this creates the idea of strife. When I look out for myself, and that's my primary objective, it creates strife. In the story of Abraham and Lot, we had an interesting situation. When Abraham moved into the land of Canaan, he carried his nephew with him. And Lot, his nephew, he was looking out for number one. That's what he was doing. And Abraham became a very wealthy man. He had many, many flocks. Lot also became a very wealthy man, and they were keeping their flocks fairly well together. And then the herdsmen for their flocks, the herdsmen got in quarrels with each other because they were infringing on the territory of one another. And so Abraham goes to him and said, let's not have strife between us. You choose the section that you want to go to, and I will choose whatever is left. And then the Bible says that Lot saw the well-watered plains of Jordan. He saw the good land. He saw the productive land and all of this. And so that's what Lot chose, because he was looking out for number one. And then Abraham had what was left, which was not nearly as desirable, but Abraham was willing to take that. God spoke to Abraham and said, Abraham, I want you to look around. All the land that you see, someday I'm going to give to your descendants. Well, what did Lot do? Lot went and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Sodom was called a very wicked, evil city. Even the name itself is suggestive of evil and wickedness. But he pitched his tent near Sodom. Now, it's kind of interesting to me that Lot was willing to take a chance to become associated with evil, but try not to let the evil associate with him. Lot had a family. He had a wife. He had at least 2 children, 2 daughters. We don't know whether he had other children or not, but he had 2 daughters. But it seems that in the decision that Lot made to go and live in Sodom or near Sodom, he didn't stop to consider his children or his wife. It was what he wanted. Why? Because he was looking out for number one. You see, when we start looking out for number one, others kind of fade into the background. And it's me, it's mine. It's not family, it's not us, it's not what's best, it's what I want. That's the whole idea of looking out for number one. Well, I mentioned a moment ago that strife comes in relationships. That always does. There's no such thing, I don't think, of as a perfect relationship where there's no strife, there's no competition, or there's no disagreements. Sometimes disagreements are rather sharp. And within your family, as you were a child growing up, you experienced that with your brother or sister, or with your mother and father. Strife is a part of relationship. It always is. There's no getting around it. Strife can be something that we build on. Strife can be something that we benefit from. It's a little bit like competition in some way, not in every way certainly, but it's a little bit like competition in some ways, because through competition people learn how to overcome difficulties. Now, the difference is that Abraham saw this strife as a part of the relationship, where Lot saw the strife as not in reference to the relationship, but something that was hindering what I want to do. Something that's hindering my prosperity. Something that's hindering my progress. Something that's hindering my education. Abraham saw it in terms of the relationship. And so Abraham said to Lot, Lot, you go ahead and take the section that you want. Unselfishness. Lot, on the other hand, saw an opportunity to get ahead. And he was going to do that at the expense of Abraham. But that's okay. He didn't mind that, because this is something that is beneficial to me. And since it's beneficial to me, that's okay. Strife is a part of all relationships. Strife is not necessarily bad. We learn some very wonderful lessons through strife. When people disagree with me, I can't stand to be with people who always agree with me. When people disagree with me, it says, Jack, you need to evaluate and analyze and think about your side of this issue. Could you be wrong? I've said this before, so say I now again. One of the great things about the whole business of intense Bible study is that you are constantly challenged. You see what somebody says here about this. You see what other people have learned from this. And you sit down and say to yourself, I never have considered that. I pick up a book and I read a commentary maybe on James or Peter or Jude or Matthew or some book in the Bible, and I'll see, here's a man who has studied for a long time, and he came to this conclusion that I had never thought of before. And so strife, differences challenge us to inspect and analyze our beliefs, our positions, not just biblically, but in business, in families, in just about every relationship of life where there is some difference. It causes us to go ahead and analyze it. Unfortunately, there's another side to that. Strife can also cause us to become stubborn. I don't care. This is what I was raised on. This is what I believe, and I don't want to hear anymore. J.P. Sanders said one time, that we need to learn the difference between being open-minded and empty-headed. And I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was a pretty good analysis of things, because the idea of being open-minded is not to just accept whatever comes along. We need to be closed-minded in reference to some things. I'm closed-minded about my belief in God. I believe there's a God, and you're just not going to shake me from that. That's all there is to it. You are not going to shake me from that. Do I understand all there is to understand? Oh, no. I surely don't. In my trust of my wife, in my trust of people that I'm very close to, if you came along and said, did you know that such and such a person lied to you about this because it was not true? If I know that person real well, I'll say to myself, no, that person would not have done that. Somewhere along the line, you have misunderstood this. So we have to be closed-minded about some things. But we also have to be open-minded about some things and sit down and say to ourselves, what in this disagreement that we've had, what is it that I can learn, not to get more for myself, but to be a better person? Abraham was very unselfish in all of this. So Abraham says, help yourself, Lot. Take whatever you want to. What a different story there would have been here if Lot had said no. Uncle Abe, and because he was his uncle, Uncle Abe, you're the older one. You have been so good to me in so many ways. I want you to take your choice of anything. Abraham probably would have come to different conclusions than Lot came to in reference to that. Why? Because Abraham valued the relationship and Lot only valued himself. I couldn't care less, Uncle Abe, what happens to you. I'm going to take the best part and you just go your own way. Well, now, he didn't exactly say that, but in his actions, that's exactly what was taking place, wasn't it? Well, strife then. Strife can be good. Strife can benefit us. One of the things that we have constant strife with is evil. Can we learn anything out of this strife? Oh, yes, we surely can. We can find out when we are confronted with evil, we can find out something about the deceiving consequences of evil. Deceiving consequences. Evil has something to offer to us. It appears in the beginning to be very, very desirable, very enjoyable. All kinds of ways that the devil dresses these things up. The devil is dressed up like an angel of light, the Bible says. He's dressed up like an angel of light. Oh, he's got to have something. There couldn't be any harm in this. Well, it's consenting adults. And consenting adults are supposed to be able to do anything they want to do. So the devil dresses these things up real well. Now, in the strife that we have with evil, that whole thing helps us to sit down and say, what would Christ have done in this situation? To ask myself the question, will this draw me closer to God? I like James's statement. Draw near to God, and what? He will draw near to you. Here I am, God is over there. I take a step toward God, He takes a step toward me. I take another step toward God, He takes another step toward me. It works the same way, you see, in the opposite direction. When we move away from God, God moves away from us. This is kind of a corny illustration. I understand it. It doesn't. It's not an absolute thing, but you know, when we break off friendships with someone, we find ourselves moving away from that person, and we find that person moving away from us, and so the chasm between us becomes bigger and bigger. And it's very hard to remake a relationship like that. Why does this happen? Because somebody's looking out for number one. The relationship is not what is important to Lot. It's me. I am the one who is important. I'm looking out for my own self-interest. Well, when we confront evil, we need, in some ways, to do just exactly the same thing. We need to draw near to God, and He'll draw near to us. Why do we not do that? Because the relationship that we have with God is not perfect in our own minds. You know, this whole story of Jonah. When God said, do something, Jonah, Jonah says to himself, I don't know whether he said this to God or not, but he said to himself, I think, no, I don't want to do that. What am I going to do? I'm going to run away. I'll get away from the influence of God. And so he did. He took a ship and sailed off toward Spain, actually, Tarshish. Well, sometimes don't we kind of do the same thing? When we see that God is requiring something of us, what do? We remove ourselves just a little bit from God. Bad step for me. Because when I do that, it begins to weaken the relationship that I have with God. Why does this take place? I am looking out for number one. I would rather do what I want to do than to do what God wants me to do. I want to be my boss. I want to be the one who decides. And we're living in a culture and in a generation where this is a very, very important thing. You do your own thing. You do what you want to do and just kind of let the chips fall where they may. Well, it was Abraham's unselfishness and all of this that really ended up paying off for Abraham. Now, let's stop and look at this for just a moment. Sometime when we draw near to God, it looks like we're losers. Because refusing to look out for number one sometime is a step backwards. I will not do this. I will not accept this. Why? Because this is not something that's compatible with my belief in God. And for a while, that may retard our growth. Abraham didn't look at the immediate situation. He looked at the whole thing, his relationship to this man Lot. I read a story many, many years ago about a man who was a very successful businessman. He had to travel a lot as a result of it. And he lost the relationship with his son. He and his son just going farther and farther apart. But I'm a good father because I'm providing for my family. And I'm making good money so we can live in a nice place, we can have a nice car, we can send our son to the best schools and all this sort of thing. And that just demands my time. And the son and the father went further and further away. One day they had a conversation with each other. And the son just laid it out on the table. Said, Dad, you're never around. You don't care anything about me. You care more about your job. You care more about making money than you do about me as your son. And the father suddenly realized that, hey, you know, this little kid is right. I have not spent the time with him. So he made him a promise. He said, son, on such and such a day, you and I are going to go and do something together all day long. Well, the little boy said, your promises don't mean anything. You promise things before, you don't carry them out. And the father said, I promise you, I will carry this out. Well, a few days before he was supposed to go and spend the day with his son, maybe fishing or something like that, just a few days before, his boss came to him and he said, there's a customer, one of the best customers we have, and we're about to lose him. You need to go and see this man and secure his account again, because he means so much to our company. And the father said, I promised my son that I'd take him somewhere on that day. And his boss said, well, you just got to tell your son you can't do it, that's all. And he said, no, I can't tell my son that. He said, well, if you want your job, you can tell your son that. And the father stopped and thought about this. Shall I lose a relationship with my son and break my promise? Or shall I lose a relationship with my boss and lose my job? Those are pretty tough. Those are pretty tough decisions, aren't they? And he said to himself, my son is more valuable than my job. So he told his boss, he said, I'm sorry, I've made a promise to my son. I will not break that promise. I don't remember the tail end of that story. I don't remember whether he lost his job or not. But I do remember this. He gained the confidence of his son. Why? Because he finally learned the importance of the relationship instead of the importance of looking out for number one. How many marriages have broken up because people are just looking out for number one? Oh, the children, they'll get along all right. They'll survive. They'll be okay. It's me. I'm not happy in this relationship. But what have you contributed to the relationship? Well, you see, my wife is this and this and this and this, and she just doesn't make me happy anymore. Looking out for number one costs us relationships. Looking out for the relationships costs us sacrifice. I said a moment ago that sometime to preserve a relationship or not to look out for number one, preserving a relationship causes us to lose some things. Yes, that father may have lost the job. But in doing so, he gained his son. So there's a temporary setback, sometimes even a permanent setback, when we set number one aside and concentrate on relationships. So sometimes selfishness really pays off. It just really pays off. It pays off quickly. It pays off abundantly, perhaps, but in the long run, it destroys relationships. Now, let's spend just a few minutes in looking at what this cost nephew Lot. We know something about Abraham and how Abraham, because he was a magnanimous man, because he was willing to be unselfish, God says, look around. Everything you see, I'm going to give to your descendants. Now, Lot is looking out for number one. What happened to him? Well, he went and pitched his tent toward Sodom, it says. And the first thing you know, he lived inside the city. Angels appeared to Abraham in the form of messengers, and they said, we've got to tell Abraham what we're up to. We're going to go to Sodom and look at that city and see if it is as wicked as we think it is. Well, but Lot lives there. Yes, Lot lives there. Lot apparently was a well-known man in Sodom, because when the angels, in the form of human beings, men, when they came to the house, the men of Sodom demanded that Lot allow his guests there, these men, to come out so that they could do what they want to do with them. And Lot had a couple of daughters. He said, no, I have 2 daughters. Let me give you my daughters instead of giving you these men. You remember how Lot and his wife and his daughters, how they escaped? They got out of the city, and God said, take off and go. Don't turn back. And you remember how he lost his wife. She turned around, and she died. She became a pillar of salt. Pretty heavy price, because he looked out for number one. He went and stayed in a cave with his 2 daughters. They got him drunk and had an incestuous relationship with him, and 2 nations grew out of that, ultimately out of that relationship. One was named Moab, and the other was named Ammon, and they became arch enemies of the descendants of Abraham. That came about because Lot was looking out for number one. You see, the consequences of selfishness don't always show themselves up right away. Sometimes it's way on down the line before those consequences are seen. When we look out for number one, we forget about relationships. So, what does this lesson about Lot have for us? I think it needs to teach us that relationships are more important than any one person. Relationships thrive because of harmony. Harmony thrives because of unselfishness. And so, when you insert this monster of selfishness and looking out for number one, when you insert that into any relationship, you begin having strife, but it's an unhealthy kind of strife. It isn't the strife that causes me to investigate. It's the strife instead that causes me to begin thinking of myself rather than the relationship. And the story of Lot and the choices that he made, this story tells us something that's very, very important about us, about life, and that is that our choices have consequences. Are we going to choose then to preserve the relationship? Are we going to choose to preserve the other person? Or are our decisions going to be, I want what I want? This is not as easy as it seems. I remember thinking about some of these things when I was dating my wife. I thought to myself, if I could just marry her, I would be the happiest man in the whole world. And that was true. At the same time, I had to be thinking about the fact that that's not the most important thing in my relationship with her. The most important thing in that relationship is, what can I do to make that lady the happiest lady in the world? And you know, there's an interesting thing in the 8th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Now, although it doesn't deal with this specifically, it does deal with it indirectly. Paul is talking about in the marriage relationship, a sexual relationship, and he makes a statement that the wife does not have power over her own body, but the husband. You know, you think, I wish he'd stopped right there. Okay. Then he says, and the husband does not have power over his own body, but the wife. You see, we have to understand that in that relationship, or in any relationship of life, we need not to look only at ourselves, but see the relationship and what we can do individually to make that relationship more valuable in the eyes of the other person. And when that takes place, we learn that there's a joy in sacrifice. There's a joy in service. There's a joy in doing things for somebody else. Maybe that's the genius behind this statement of the Lord. Is more blessed, what? To give than to receive. But it isn't until that relationship takes that kind of a text that we're able to understand the real meaning of Jesus' statement. If you're not a Christian tonight, if you have any reason at all to respond to the gospel invitation, we're going to sing a song that suggests his call. Shall we stand together and sing, please?